Hi to everybody! You probably heard of the recent spike of interest toward UFOs. And perhaps you listened or read accounts and opinions from pilots, scientists, and other experts. You probably did not hear from historians. Well, why should we, you may say? Why should historians know anything about flying objects, radar tracks, and the likes? Those people can barely change a light bulb anyway. True enough. And yet, it might be quite helpful to get a historian's view and add a little bit of historical perspective to the phenomenon. Because if you do so, then the UFO craze of the last 70 years or so looks a lot like the modern iteration of those strange things seen in the sky that have been sighted for thousands of years, each epoch interpreting them according to their own culture and canons. Take, for example, the Annals of Rome, in which the high priest of the city recorded for centuries unusual phenomena occurring both on earth and in the heavens. Almost religiously, one may say, since they were feared as possible omens of things to come. In the 4th or 5th century of the current era, an author named Julius Subsequens collected a number of them in a book of prodigies, here in a Renaissance edition. Let's see what you can find in it. Entry number 1. When Gaius Murius and Lucius Valerius were consuls, that would be the year 100 before the current era, a burning torch was seen by many to suddenly fall in Tarquinia, a Tuscan city close to Rome. Towards sunset, a round object like a globe, a round or circular shield, took its path in the sky from west to east. In the year 188 BCE, a rain of stones fell on the Aventine Hill, one of the hills of Rome. A few years later, it rained blood for 2 days. And in 91 BCE, there came a terrific noise in the sky, and a globe of fire appeared burning in the north. 50 years later, something like a sort of weapon or missile rose with a great noise from the earth and soared into the sky. We can easily relate some of these sightings to phenomena like bright meteors, meteor showers, or perhaps volcanic eruptions. At times, winds from the Sahara Desert can blow sand and dust over the northern coasts of the Mediterranean Sea, where Rome is located. When it rains down, everything gets covered in a reddish mud that might be described as a rain of blood. Other sightings are harder to explain, but the important point is they try to interpret and describe them through images and objects they were familiar with. And so, their skies were ridden not only with rains of blood, but even with swords, flying shields, and burning torches. So a question arises. Why should we be any different? Why shouldn't everything look like a nail to our own hammer? A common idea is that the ancients could not have seen alien spaceships in the sky because they could not conceive of other worlds and of extraterrestrial life. Well, this is not exactly true. Ancient philosophers actually debated a lot their possible existence. One of the biggest guys in the field, the Greek philosopher Aristotle, thought that other worlds outside the Earth would involve logical contradictions, so there could not be any. However, many dissented. The atomist philosophers, for instance, believed that the universe was eternal and infinite. So the combinations of atoms that gave origin to the Earth and life on Earth must have happened even elsewhere. There have to be infinite inhabited worlds, both like and unlike the Earth. What was not in the cards was spaceflight. Contacts between such worlds were deemed impossible and a matter for satirical novelists at most. The existence of extraterrestrial was conceivable, but not that they could visit the Earth. And there is no evidence indeed that any celestial prodigy was ever interpreted that way, or that some documents can only be explained as reports of UFO sightings. The same goes for medieval or Renaissance paintings that are often cited as evidence for UFOs flying around in those times. There is nothing mysterious or inexplicable in those images if one only bothers to ask an art historian. Those that a modern observer could see as UFOs were artistic conventions for the sun and the moon running after each other in the sky, or divine grace represented as a dark cloud with a silver, well, in this case, a golden lining. Every image is always coded with the conventions of its time and culture. The problem is, centuries later, most of us have lost the keys to interpret them. So it could be a good idea to ask someone who knows more. Of course, even then there was no scarcity of celestial prodigies. People seem to scrutinize the skies with special attention and anxiety in times of great uncertainty, or when epochal changes are expected. The 1500s were one of those times, especially in Germany, that was the epicenter of the Lutheran Reformation, of desperate upheavals by oppressed peasants, and of religious wars. The imminence of a new exterminating flood like that of the Bible, followed perhaps by the arrival of the Antichrist, would be announced by celestial signs, like the famous battle in the sky observed above the city of Nuremberg in 1561, or a similar phenomenon witnessed by the city of Basel in 1566. To us, a parhelion is just a fascinating atmospheric phenomenon, but to them, it was above all a cross in the sky, a religious symbol that must have a higher meaning. By the time strange things in the sky caught again the general attention in the late 1800s, they were reimagined as objects that appeared plausible to the new century, namely technological machines. In 1886, the French novelist Jules Verne published Robert the Conqueror, meaning the conqueror of the air. The book was about an inventor who builds an electric airship. In the following years, a wave of mystery airship swept the continental United States, from California to the New England. In Great Britain, the rise of Imperial Germany in the years preceding World War I caused enormous anxiety, and with German Zeppelins having a clear lead in the technology of airships, the country no longer feels safe behind its Royal Navy. In southern England, the sightings of flying battleships multiplied. In H.G. Wells's The War in the Air, published in 1908, the American battle fleet steaming to the help of Great Britain is sunk in the middle of the Atlantic by German airships. After World War II, the strange things in the sky morphed again into something else. Usually incredibly advanced spaceships, arguably of extraterrestrial origin, since no earthly technology seems to be able to do these things. Two things had happened. First, spaceflight was now plausible. Indeed, the space age was about to begin. If you can do it, why not someone else? Second, the atomic bomb. The fear of the nuclear Armageddon, of the end of civilization and of life on Earth, but perhaps even the beginning of a new age. In 1958, right at the peak of the UFO craze, Carl Jung wrote a seminal small book on flying saucers, a modern myth of things seen in the skies. In the past, the unconscious revealed its seals to ordinary consciousness through myths and above all religion. But in modern times, Jung argued, the unconscious can only project itself into the material, technological objects and symbols that are appealing to contemporary consciousness. As he wrote, anything that looks technological goes down without difficulty with the modern man. And just like your humble historian, Jung was not really interested in finding out what UFOs are. UFOs may or may not be real, but the important thing to him was their psychological meaning. Whether real phenomena or hallucinations, the collective mind invested them with the same fears, hopes, and expectations that in previous centuries assumed a more obviously religious form. No longer placed in a metaphysical dimension, they are still angels, just technological ones, but still endowed with godlike powers that can either destroy humankind or save it from its own weakness and wickedness. Fun fact: when asked to investigate the UFO phenomenon, let's face it, astronomers and physicists often appear out of their depth. They have to deal with evidence, so as to speak, that is unclear and fuzzy at best, and an environment in which any possible signal seems to be drowned into a sea of noise. Those who feel like they are moving within a familiar territory are instead, guess what? Scholars in religious studies. Diana Pasolka got involved with the UFO research from a background in medieval studies. In her American Cosmic, Professor Pozolka describes her discussions and interviews with UFO believers. The conference featured speakers who were experiencers, people who had seen UFOs or had seen extraterrestrials. They described some of the same things as I had observed in my research in Catholic history: shining aerial discs, flames, and orbs, and especially how these experiences transformed their lives. The experiencers interpreted these as spiritual or religious events. She then visited a place in the New Mexico desert where contact had been established with alien visitors. I call this the sacred place because it marked the location where it is believed that non-human intelligence revealed itself to humans. In my field, the word that describes this kind of event is hierophany. A hierophany is the manifestation of the sacred. It occurs when a non-human intelligent being descends from the sky to the ground, or otherwise manifests itself. I was standing on the ground zero of a new religion. I feel as if I had been investigating this phenomenon my whole life, but I didn't call it UFO research. I called it religious studies. Here is another hierophany, one many Americans are certainly familiar with: the Transfiguration of Christ before the apostles. And here's yet another one, not dissimilar from the previous one, probably inspired by the previous one, by this time from Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Whatever those pilots saw or those radar tracks mean, we continue to project our psychological or, if you want, religious needs onto flying objects that defy our immediate understanding. We may be more scientifically and technologically advanced than our ancestors, but this does not make us fundamentally different. We are not the end of history, and the UFO saga is unlikely to be the last chapter in the long history of these strange things seen in the sky.